Hey guys, this is Reflections, a Nick Ibera podcast. Thanks for joining in. This is episode number 7. So we've gone 7 straight weeks with an episode coming out each week, Tuesday mornings. If you're tuning in for the first time, please like, share, subscribe. If you are a repeat viewer, thank you very much for repeating your viewership. I appreciate it. And hopefully you have also subscribed and end up liking this video. So there is no house cleaning today. I want to go straight into the topic. And the topic is behavior pattern recognition, and I want to talk about this for a couple reasons. So if somebody was to ask me, Nick, what is the character asset that you have that has best served you in life? I would without a doubt say behavior pattern recognition or just pattern recognition. What I mean by pattern recognition is the reality is everything repeats in life. We can go as far back as Marcus Aurelius and Meditations. This is before the coming of Christ. In there, he has a passage that talks about everything repeating. People are going to be born, people are going to die, people are going to get married, people are going to have children, people are going to participate in commerce, people are going to farm, people are going to do the same thing. They're going to gossip, they're going to do everything. And they're going to repeat that pattern throughout their lives, and their generations ahead are going to do the same thing. We can look into the Old Testament where we have one of the stories that I think highlights behavior pattern repetition is a story about Abraham. So we're going back to the Old Testament, we're going back to Genesis, but we have Abraham, okay? So he's the first major prophet that we're going to talk about today, but not the only one. He is married to a woman named Sarah. Her name is Sarai in the beginning, but a woman named Sarah, and he's called to leave his homeland where he's lived a life of comfort, and he has been called to a higher calling in service of God. During his exodus from his family's home out into the wilderness to find that higher calling and to be a part of that higher calling, he ends up lying more than once, telling a Pharaoh that his wife is actually a sister. And he does this out of fear because he's afraid that the Pharaoh wants his wife as the Pharaoh's wife, and that if they find out it's his wife, they're going to kill him. The reality is that that doesn't happen. Even when the Pharaohs find out that he is in fact the wife, they just send him on their way. So later down the road, and these are so first we have that he's leaving his comfort zone. He goes out into the wilderness, he lies, and then what we have later is that he and Sarah, or Sarai, have a very difficult time conceiving children. So what Sarah ends up doing is, through her impatience and through her distraught fear of the fact that Abraham is not going to have generation to pass on his name, Sarah allows her slave, her servant, to be the mistress of Abraham so that they can bear children. So which is an interesting thing, because if you look into the mistress and the child that she has, which is Ishmael, that is the tree that Islam goes off of, whereas what ends up happening is, if Sarah would have been patient enough and allowed God's will to take place, she ends up becoming pregnant with Isaac. They have Isaac, and Isaac is the Christian lineage, the Christian family tree. So they both start with Abraham. Islam talks about Abraham and Ishmael. Christianity talks about Abraham and Isaac. So anyways, so Isaac grows up and has a child named Jacob. Now we need to remember those three things. Abraham left, Abraham lied, Abraham ended up having children with a mistress because his wife was impatient. So that being said, Abraham has Isaac. Isaac ends up having a son named Jacob. Jacob ends up lying with his mother and going into a situation where his older brother Esau is supposed to get the patriarchal blessing so that he carries on the leadership of the family once Isaac passes away. Well, Jacob and his mother end up conning Isaac into believing that Jacob is Esau and gets that patriarchal blessing. And because he lied, Esau is upset. Obviously, he doesn't get the patriarchal blessing. He doesn't become the patriarch of the family. Well, Jacob flees. So again, he's fleeing his family. He ends up marrying a lady named Rachel. And so he's now lied and he's fled his homeland, just like Abraham. So In time, Jacob meets Rachel, and Rachel and him try to conceive for a very, very long time, and it doesn't work out. And again, Rachel becomes impatient, and she allows her servant to become Jacob's mistress, and they have a child. And so what I'm getting at is as far back as Meditations and Marcus Aurelius or Genesis in the Old Testament, we see that these behavior patterns continue to repeat through generation after generation after generation. And so when we see things happen and people doing similar things these days, these are things that have always been going on. I think that what it comes down to is that no matter what we experience in life, no matter what we go through, no matter what we see people do, these things are not new. These things are not new, whether it becomes, or whether it's a social issue, or whether it's a personal issue or a political issue. And so one of the things that prompted this particular episode is I was at the gym with a client. We were lifting, but with all my clients, we have our conversations. And the client, she said, Nick, she said, how long have we been talking politics? We have been talking politics probably the past 6 or 8 weeks. And because she's a little bit newer in politics, maybe a couple of years into it, maybe a little bit more, but I've been doing politics. Honestly, I started dipping my toes in politics in the 5th grade. So that is something that I've kept up with all my life. And so I've been able to see the patterns that occur. So going back to my conversation with my client, she said, how many times have we talked about a new topic? How many times have we seen in the media that it seems like every couple weeks there's some new dire situation that's going on in the country that everybody's upset about and that everybody's panicking over and arguing over? And I said, in 6 weeks, shoot, probably 3-4 different topics. And she goes, do you find that weird? I said, absolutely not. So here's the thing. And this is what I told her. I said, immigration, I've been watching people argue about it since George Bush. Guns, abortion, all that stuff. I've been watching people argue about it since Clinton. And probably before that, but I think Clinton is when I really started paying attention to the issues and not just the politicians. What I told her is that you're going to learn stuff about immigration this time. You're going to learn stuff about the fight about abortion, about gay rights, about gun rights, about all these different things. And your principles may change or develop a little bit, but the concepts that you carry in your head are going to be concepts that carry forward. So the next time we talk about guns in 10 years or 5 years, the next time we talk about abortion, the next time we talk about government shutdowns, the reality is that these things have happened before. And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on next is the government shutdown. So here's the thing. We have this government shutdown and SNAP benefits. We don't want to talk about the military not getting paid, but we want to talk about SNAP benefits and mothers who need help with regards to raising their children off of government welfare. And we get really upset. We get really hyper-focused on this issue. And we are being told by the media, we're being told by the politicians, we're being told by everybody that this is a dire issue and that we need to get it figured. You guys, since 1975, do you know how many times the government shut down? 20 times. It's shut down 20 times. And I've been through it. I've been through it in a job that I dealt with the Social Security Administration, and I dealt with employees at the Social Security Administration that were absolutely affected by it. But you know what? Those mortgage companies, the car loans, all those different things, they understood what was going on and they worked with them. And I'm not saying that every government shutdown is the same, but the reality is we make it through it. As a nation, we make it through it. Now, with that being said, what I have seen people act, there are people that I've had in my DMs that are typically well-grounded, and they end up cussing at me. They're saying things that I can tell are highly emotional, emotionally driven. There's kind of a lack of emotional regulation in what they're saying, and it's because they have been conditioned by the government, by the politicians, to freak the fuck out about what's going on when there's absolutely nothing that they're going to be able to do. There's no post these people are going to make. There's no comment these people are going to make. There's nobody they're going to talk to that's going to change the situation. So they're literally getting pissed off about nothing that they have control over. And that's what I am working on as an individual is like, hey, do you have control over this? Because if you don't have control over it, why are you worried about it? The second thing is if you want control over it, or if you want to be able to say, yeah, I tried to make a difference. I tried to make a true difference, not just post some BS memes or comment on somebody or hit somebody up in their DM and tell them that Trump's a piece of shit or whatever it is that you want to say. why don't you contribute to campaigns? Why don't you run for office yourself? Why don't you help knock on doors for candidates that you support? And then you're actually doing something. But if you're not going to do that, then you have literally no control besides the ballot box every 2 years. Speaking of the ballot box and speaking of behavior pattern recognition, here we go again. We're going to see in the next year, the Democrats are going to tell us that the closer we get to elections, watch. Mark my words, we're going to amp this up. Democrats are going to tell us all about how Republicans hate minorities and poor people and women and immigrants. And Republicans are going to tell us all about how if the Democrats get elected, socialism is going to be implemented overnight. There are going to be abortion clinics at Walmart. Everybody's guns are going to be confiscated. And the reality is, I know this because I've seen it happen every 2 years for the past 25 years. It's wild that people still fall into this set of behaviors where they freak out. And a lot of times it's the same people that freak out every 2 years, and they don't see the games that are being played with regards to the behavior patterns of politicians, the behavior patterns of the media. I have a story, and this is when I realized how important behavior pattern recognition was in making a difference in how we view the world. In 2015-ish, there was a politician that had a state-level office. He had been elected to a state-level office. So he had run, obviously some local campaigns, maybe some district campaigns, but he was at a state level. He had played the game. He had had campaigns. He had had smear tactics against him. And so when we found out he had killed himself during an election cycle, everybody was like, man, what happened? And he was a Republican. And so the Republicans immediately jumped out and they said, well, he found out that the Democrats were gonna initiate a smear campaign against him, and they were going to do everything they could to make him lose the election. And I thought, this is where I started seeing, I was like, that doesn't make sense. This dude has run for election. This dude has been smeared. I've watched it. I met the dude, cool dude, went to his fundraiser, cool guy, but he had smear campaigns launched against him in the past. So that doesn't make sense, right? So I'm thinking, man, why are the Republicans saying this about their own guy if it's almost obvious that it's not true? And then a couple of days later, there was a press conference, and one of his staff members, a male, he was up at the podium, and he was talking about the loss of his friend who was also his boss, but he was crying uncontrollably. And I said, you know what it was? You know what it was? He was gay. The elected official that killed himself, he was gay. And something happened, because this is a guy that's married. I believe he had children. The normal setup, I find out what it's called, a lavender marriage, where you are married in a heterosexual relationship for alternative purposes other than the concept of marriage. And in reality, you and or your partner are gay. Anyways, lavender marriage, there's a definition for you. Anyways, that being said, I thought this dude was gay. This dude was gay, and he's part of the Republican Party, and this was a time when the LGBTQ thing, men and women's restroom, was just amping up for the first time, and I thought, that's what this is about. That's what this is about. And everybody was like, dude, you're crazy. They've already told you he was going to have a smear campaign and this. And I'm like, how did this doesn't make sense. This absolutely doesn't make sense. And then another couple days or weeks went by, and we found out that he was in fact gay, and that he was in fact frequenting a spa that involved homosexual activity. At least those were the allegations. And that the Republican Party had found out about it, and his own party was the one that was going to smear him. And when we found that out, I thought, that right there makes sense. But all the leading up to that, I was like, this doesn't make sense. And everybody's like, hey man, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're looking into this too much. And I thought, you know what? You think what you want, because in the end, I was vindicated in the sense that I was like, the way these people are behaving, what they're saying doesn't add up to those behaviors, to those actions. And I think we find the same thing when we see the media amp up our emotions, whether it's political, whether it's social. We look at George Brown, we look at Trayvon Martin, we look at, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, all these things. We get amped up about what the media says it's about, and sometimes it is. There's parts of it that are true, but in all reality, most of the time, if we are being objective, and if we are being logical, and if we are being truthful, both parties in the situation had some role to play in it. And what I mean by that is the quote unquote victim that we were marching against or rioting or marching for or rioting for, burning down federal buildings or burning down privately owned businesses for. There was more to the story that we didn't wait to hear until it was too late, until we had amped up the rhetoric and until we got things going to where people had zero sense of emotional regulation and lost their shit in a wild capacity. Patterns are going to be repeat. We're going to go through funerals. You know, when it comes to politics, we've talked about politics a little bit, but when we talk about social issues, we are going to end up going to weddings. We're going to see divorces. We're going to see, you know, sadly enough, we're going to hear about children that we know being abused. We're going to learn about people trying really hard to get what they want, and then when they get what they want, they start being lazy. We're going to see all these things because they all repeat. The takeaway in today's discussion is this. The sooner we can realize that everything repeats, including our own actions, our own behaviors, our own thoughts, we can transform how we look at things, and we can plan ahead about how we're going to react. The sooner we realize these facts that behavior patterns consistently repeat, and when we can recognize them ahead of time, we have the time between the time we recognize what's going on and between the time that it actually happens to prepare our reaction, to be in a situation where we can remain calm and composed, and we can identify what it is that's going on, and not only that, but how we are going to react. And you know, I've talked about it before, and I'm going to reiterate. I want to be remembered as a man who is full of knowledge, who is full of empathy, who is full of compassion, but was also full of composure. And I think the finest way that we have to be able to compose ourselves is to learn that behavior pattern recognition, whether it's for a job interview. We know what questions. Behavior patterns of job interviewers, they're all the same. They may tweak for the position or the income or whatever, but job interviews, they're all the same. We're going to go through funerals. We're going to go through the loss of young people that shouldn't have died as early as they did. We're going to go through all these things, to include the political thing, to include the social thing, to include the heartbreaks. What we need to do as stewards of stoicism and stewards of emotional regulation is to be able to get through those times thinking logically, thinking in a composed capacity, and remembering to be kind to everybody that we talk to, because if we can do that, we can really turn the tide of how things operate on social media, how things operate in personal relationships, and how our relationship with our own self operates. And so I hope this has helped. I hope that you take a little bit away from this in reality, in the capacity that we have the ability to identify things ahead of time if we're paying attention, and if we think about things that we've experienced in the past, and we can hypothesize what's going to happen. And the more we do it, the better we get, and the better we get, the more we can plan ahead for exactly how we are going to compose ourselves when those events actually take place. You guys, I hope that you guys are enjoying the podcast. If you are, please like, subscribe, comment if you want. I try and stay in touch and respond to every comment that's put in the comment section. And if you have any questions or ideas for podcasts, just give me a shout. I'm always open to ideas, because I want to make sure that I'm keeping in touch with the viewer as much as I am with my own thoughts. You guys have a good day.